Before we begin this episode, I'd like to recognize the Harsh Rules Patreon supporters that help make content like this possible. If you'd like to support the channel, head over to patreon.com/harshrules to learn more. And once again, thank you for your support. This is Harsh Rules, I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to take a look at War of the Ring, the card game. So this is the card version, as the name implies, of the War of the Ring board game. And it's designed by Ian Brody and released by Ares Games. And as you can see from the watermark across the front of the box, this is a demo that was sent to me by Ares Games to take a look at and share with you guys on my channel. Let's talk a little bit about kind of what this is from a quality perspective. This is not the final version of the game. This is just a demo. So when the final version comes out, of course, it's going to, this box, I open it up, it's empty, it doesn't have a tray, all those kinds of things will be in the final version. As expected, I think the box might actually be a little bit bigger. Every component in this demo is stamped with the word demo. So as we go through this, don't be alarmed. This demo will not be on the final version. You actually pay money for. This is just for people like myself and other folks that are previewing the game. So let's take a look first at this rule book. And this, once again, this is Ares Games. So we're talking about a very premium board game company. Let me make sure we get this in the frame. So we've got lots of pictures, diagrams. So you can see here on this diagram is showing the game setup. This is a 2 to 4 player game. It's designed, the full, what they call the trilogy game is designed for 2 or 4 players, but it's set up as a 4-player game where in a 2-player mode, each player plays 2 groups. So you'll see, it's maybe a little hard to see on this, get out of the glare, this diagram, but, there's 2 red shadow players and 2 blue free peoples players. So there's that version of the game. There's also like an introductory fellowship game, where it's basically like a portion of the full game and you play that with just 2 players, so that makes it a little bit easier. But we'll look at the components in just a moment. But as you can see, every page is stamped demo, right? You can download the book online. It's there if you want to read through and check out this. It does not have demo online. It's the actual copy. This is a hard copy, so they demo stamped everything. So if you want to look at that, all the art, if you've played War of the Ring or you've seen the art, it's all fantastic. There's all kinds of paintings and stuff that's all integrated. Most of the art is going to be stuff you've seen before in War of the Ring, the board game. But here, it's integrated into the card game. So yeah, lots of colors. You can go on site and check this out. There's a few key things from when I'm going through it that I'll share with you. Let me see if I can get that right. Share with you guys as we kind of look at the cards. We've got to remember, first and foremost, it's a card game. So there are card game mechanics that, positioning of cards, discard piles, eliminated piles. So if you really like card games, this is like a top tier card game with a War of the Ring theming. If you're new to card games, there's of this caliber, there's quite a bit of card management type stuff that you need to learn to play through this. So let's take a look at the components, and we'll go through those, and Will kind of give you a very high level overview of the game so you can get a sense kind of how it plays. And that will be it for the unboxing, and then we'll see what else we can do. So with that said, let's talk about the components we have here, and I'm going to give you a high level overview of kind of the gameplay so you kind of get a feel of how this thing works. So we have 2 sizes of cards. We have the larger cards, and then we have the kind of more standard size playing card size. The larger size cards are called location cards, and the smaller ones are called faction cards. Now, the location cards, there's 2 types. There's these cream-backed ones, and then there's the red and blue ones in this pile. These are both location cards. This first one is the path card. And there's a set of these. There are 9 paths. You play a path every round, and therefore, as you play through, there's 3 cards per kind of chapter. So the 1, the 2, the 3, there's 3 in each of those. You're going to draw one randomly and put it out. This is Buckleberry Ferry. It's a path 1 card. As you can see, Buckleberry's like right at the beginning of the story. These cards represent the narrative of Sam, Frodo, and the rest of the Fellowship making their journey across Middle-earth to Mordor to destroy the One Ring. So that's their story. And these are called battleground cards. These represent the larger war that's going on in Middle-earth during that time. So, while the Fellowship is making their journey, there's all these conflicts happening all over Middle-earth, and that represents this. So the blue cards are always the free peoples, and the red card are always the shadow. So cream cards are technically free people's cards. The difference here is the battlegrounds. If they're blue, the free peoples are the defenders and the shadow are the attackers. And if they're red, the shadow are the defenders and the free peoples are the attackers. The cream colored card, all of them, the Fellowship is the defender and the shadow is the attacker. So just to get an idea of like how they're trying to communicate these conflicts across. So we have Buckleberry Ferry. It's path 1. It's the beginning of the game. Buckleberry Ferry has a natural defense for the Fellowship of 1 shield. So they're using these shield icons to represent a defense point. If the shadow plays a card onto the path, first you need to match up the path number here. This is path 1, and you can only place a card if your path number on the card being played matches. So this one is 1 through 3. This is path 1. The shadow player could play this, and when they play the card, this little section, you notice the cream section on the card is same as the cream on the back of this card. It helps you know which icons are in play. So this is a little skull symbol. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a little skull. Let me see if I can get that into there. That is a corruption icon. So if you play that, you're going to put a corruption point onto this Buckleberry Ferry path card, and the defense and that would cancel them out. But if you have 2 corruptions, or 3, or however many you can pile onto this card as a shadow player, and there's not enough shields to absorb it, then the shadow player gets the victory point plus any corruption they've put onto this card that's in excess. So if for some mysterious reason, if the Fellowship decided they weren't going to put a card, or they didn't put enough cards, and there was more corruption, then those points would count to the shadow player as kind of an extra victory point for each corruption mark or corruption point. They have tokens over here. You can keep track of that. So we'll talk about those in a bit. Now, the free people obviously don't want that to happen. So they're going to draw their own cards they'll have in their hand, and they're going to put cards to add more shields and therefore cancel out corruption so that the Fellowship can win the card. Because if they cancel out all the corruption, then the Fellowship can claim this card and this victory point. So it's a very simple system. You're battling for these bigger cards to get victory points, and it's a matter of putting on defense versus offense, and the larger one will win, which sounds extremely simple. It is, but it's all about how you get the cards there and all the extra abilities and things you need to coordinate to make that very simple action happen. So Sam Gamgee, same thing. Sam is path 1 through 9, therefore he can be played on any path card through the entire, because Sam's there for the whole journey, right? Same as Frodo has a 1 through 9. They can do the whole thing. Another character that maybe is with the Fellowship and then they break from the Fellowship and go someplace else, they will not be able to play through every path card. They may only be available for certain ones. So that's how path cards work. So you have these, you understand kind of the basic concept. So let's look at the battleground. So how do these work? So in a very similar fashion, but the assignment of cards can be a little more complicated. So with the battleground card, if this is a shadow one, the shadow is the defender, but the shadow can only add more cards to put more shields on it if the faction matches. So this is Mordor faction, and at the bottom of the reference sheet, it gives you the legend with all of the factions. So if you can't remember them all, you can check. So this is Mordor. You can only play Mordor cards onto this particular battleground. Other ones that might be like Isengard, so you can only play the Isengard, faction onto that. Each card will show their faction in the upper left-hand corner. Similarly, on the other side of the card, the Free Peoples can only play specific factions to attack. So this one is the Dunedain, and this is the Wizard faction. Only those cards can be played. So you start to see that although it's a very simple idea just to get the points, trying to figure out who can go and who can't go and the timing of whether they're available or not, adds more complexity to how you can, depending on what you have in your hand, or later we'll talk about what you have in reserve, what you can put onto these cards. Very simple here, except instead of corruption, it's cross swords. So if you have cross swords, if you're the attacker, you add points. Defenders have shields. Very simple, right? So let's talk about these guys here, these faction cards. Faction cards there are items, there are characters, there are armies, and there are events. Let's see if one pops up here where I can throw it out there for you to see. Knowing me, I don't see it just yet. But there are events. Here we go. The Ring Wraiths are abroad. So here's Saruman. Here's the Nazgul. So certain characters will have also special items that can be attached to them that add even more damage or other, more defense or more offense. There's also special abilities that come through it where you can draw more cards or you can trade cards for things and whatnot. Armies, the distinct thing there is they can only be played on a battleground. You cannot send an army to the Fellowship one. So you have that. And then events will allow you to do things like this one is draw 7 cards, then eliminate a card and pick up 2 Nazgul characters. So we're going to talk about card play and how all that, that card management system works. So you have a lot of neat, every card has art. There's various icons for abilities and things that you can either use to try to help the Fellowship, hurt the Fellowship, or support your side in a battle. Okay? So now I'm going to move this out of the way for a second, and we're going to give a very high level look at how the card management system works. And I might have to adjust a few things just to make room because this frame is like really cramped. So each player will have a deck. This is your draw deck. This is where your cards come through. You're going to draw 7 at the beginning of the game. 6, 7. Right? Then you're going to go through your cards, check out what you got. And this deck is not shuffled very well, so I got a lot of elf cards in here. But then what you're going to do is take 2 of these cards, and you're going to do what's called cycling them. So that's the next part of the card management player area thing. It's recommended you keep your deck face forward. That way you tip your piles on the side to try to help you remember. So the cycle side, so this is essentially a discard pile. So every time you cycle, a card will go into here, and then of course when the draw deck runs out, you'll shuffle these into a new deck. So very, very common practice, right? So a key thing to remember besides that, which helps you kind of coordinate your opening hand is that each of these cards, to play a card to one of the either the path or the battleground, you need to pay another card to go along with it. So if I want to play Legolas here, I need to pick another card to pay to get him out of my hand to one of the paths or to a reserve area, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So cycle that, put that in there. Now in combat, these guys can get overwhelmed and they get eliminated. Those would go on this side, and that's your eliminated pile. So as you work your way through cards, obviously the elimination pile is going to grow. It's not part of your cycle, so that means your overall deck is going to start shrinking. And you're going to start losing, you're not going to have all the cards that you were used to because they kind of got burned up and went to eliminated. So the other part of the card play that makes it very complex, and this is where all the strategy kind of, bears its head, is the reserve area. So remember, we talked about certain cards are only eligible to be played at certain time based on what's on in the center of the play area. So you got your other players will be around and they've got all their own play areas. So you can then cycle a card to put a card into reserve. And basically that puts him in a position so that when this opportunity arises, you can directly play that card to the battleground or the path. Whenever you put a card in reserve, you pay for it within the card, just you do anything else that's got to go towards the center of the table, right? These cards need to rest for a round. So you play it in one round, it's put sideways, rest, the next round it turns up, and then it's ready to go into battle. But you don't, you're looking for your opportunity to materialize in this section of the board. But while it's in reserve, there are certain cards, and all the text is different per card, but some cards will actually give you benefits by being in reserve. So if it's in reserve, you can draw an extra card at the end of the round, or just about anything is your imagination. There's all kinds of variations of what you can do. So then you get a little bit, I want to play this character onto a battleground, but if I do that, I lose my reserve ability, or I lose this other ability. Sometimes you can cycle a card back out of reserve into here to pull something out of a deck, or a different spot. Like I think the Nazgul card we looked at, you could play it and then pull some Nazgul out of the deck without having to wait for them to show up. So it's a very active card. You're doing all kinds of things with the cards. So that's where the complexity comes in. This stuff up here, once you actually get things on the card and you're just resolving it to get victory points, pretty simple to understand. This is where all the strategy and the challenge comes in, of not only kind of playing the game versus yourself and you're managing your cards, watching what other people are doing with what's available. You can see, wondering if they're going to deploy armies into a location or not. That's all part of the strategy of the game. Reserve cards will stack up. You can then send them in. They'll go to battle. Sometimes they survive. Sometimes they win. Sometimes they don't, depending on the points and whatnot that's in there. It's a little bit of a bluffing system going on of, sometimes you'll pile on cards and you're just waiting like, oh, so do you want to bring your army in to deal with that? Or are you just going to back off and let me have the points? Or because ultimately once they're engaged, then you sort through all that and the cards can be eliminated, and then you don't have that card anymore. So you've got to choose very carefully which battles you are pretty sure you really want that location and can win when we talk about that. So that's basically how that goes. That's going, all four players are working these cards. If you're playing with just two players the full game, that means I would be playing, let's say, I'm playing Aragorn in the full game. It's kind of like a title you have to keep track of which decks are which, and it also tells you which factions that player has. So I think it's Aragorn, and then you have Frodo, and they have different factions aligned to them. So at the bottom of this card, the Shadow are the same way. There's basically Mordor, and then Saruman and the Southron and what's the other one? The monstrous one. They'll be in a group. So you can't just ram all the cards together and play them straight. There is a version of that called Duel that you can play, but when you're playing that 4-player game or a 2-player that's managing 2 decks at the same time, you got to be really careful to make sure you don't get things mixed up and they go into a battle or they come out going back to cycle. You don't get confused and mix them, or you're going to get yourself all screwed up. So that is basically how that works. You have tokens to help you keep track of when you're adding extra shields or extra cross swords. If you're winning a path with corruption, you have these corruption tokens as you're piling up corruption. So winning these guys, like if the shadow wins this, they get the point, plus they get the corruption. So keep the corruption token so you can, helps you keep track of the score. I'm trying to think if there's anything. I mean, there's a ton of stuff in this game to learn. I'm just trying to give you the broad strokes to give you an idea to see if that's a game that appeals to you. Like if you really like that kind of heavy card management and strategizing and planning, like every game, because of how cards turn up and how you play them, you need to be careful, and every game kind of feels unique. So each round I can walk through just quickly the round. So you're going to do the location step where you place the cards, taking actions to put cards around. Once everything's in place, then there's a combat step where you basically resolve who won these bigger cards, the location cards. You're going to make a victory check. So what that means is at any time when you're doing the victory check, you're going around counting up the victory points. And it's a really cool system because if a player has 10 points above everybody else, they automatically win the game and it's over. You don't just keep fighting and dragging it out forever just for the fun of just torturing the other players. You can then end the game, and if you want and have time, you can just start again and work through it again. But if you can outpace the other players by 10 points, then you win. So what happens is, and this is where, there's this ring icon comes into play that can be helpful, is you have these, not icon, token. Each player will have one of these too. So as you go through, and if you feel like you're starting to lose, like one guy's pulling ahead, if he hits 10 points, the game's going to be over. To stay in the game, you can flip this over and collect 2 more cards. So it gives you, if you're like, God, if I just had a couple more cards, maybe I could do something. That's you have this kind of emergency button that you can flip it. Now, if you can maintain this and not take cards, at the end of the game, you get an extra victory point by turning this in. So it's kind of has a dual use. If you're doing pretty well, that's another victory point you can factor in at the end of the game. If once you finish the whole thing and you're counting up, like that might be enough to put you over the edge if you've been controlled yourself. If you flipped it, that also might keep the game going and keep you in it by giving you a couple extra cards and give you more stuff to play. So I hope this has been helpful to kind of explain. The only other thing I have to show you that's, just basic stuff. I mean, we could go on for hours about all the things you can do in this game. They also provide this card that helps you keep track of what turn and whatnot. So they have a turn card you can set up, and you can use this marker to keep track of whose turn it is and which side and all that good stuff. So kind of gives you everything you need to do. These reference cards are very useful. There's probably about 50 things I'm forgetting to tell. I'm sure someone will pop off in the comment section and let me know how I've fallen short in the description of this game. But if you find this really interesting, and especially if you love kind of the high-level card games, this is going to be it's going to be kind of debuting, I guess would be the word, fully at Essen. So if you are there, if you go to that gaming show and you can then purchase your own copy, the final version of the game without the demo, and everything will be gorgeous, and the box will have a tray in it, and you can organize everything really nice. After that, it's coming out. Probably you'll be able to get it fastest after that is to get it from an online site, so you can have it shipped to your house. If you have a local game store that you like to support, I'm sure this is a pretty high profile game. It will show up. If not, ask them to make sure they put it on an order list, like if you get your stuff through a comic shop or however they do that. But can't exactly remember. I want to say it's November, December timeframe. So this is kind of a holiday release. So be on the lookout for that. Other than that, this is War of the Ring, the card game, and I'm Ben Harsh for Harsh Rules. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like and share with your friends. To be the first notified when the next episode of Harsh Rules becomes available, please hit the bell icon for notifications. And as always, this is Ben Harsh for Harsh Rules. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.